Okay, so now I think, Mike, if you introduce Jared. Jared. Now I'll give a proper introduction, Jared, and apologize for my brain freeze on forgetting the title of your great book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, which is a fantastic book. I know we've had it reviewed by the Organization for Propaganda Studies. But you're at Morgan State University, and I understand you're going to talk to us about your own experience from your own discipline area and your own subject area of the kind of constraints and pressures on academics in your situation. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
No, thank you all very much. Thank you, Piers, for that, and to all those gathered, and to OPS for hosting and putting this together. And I just want to, again, not only thank those who are gathered, but those who are both known and not, and who have and continue to suffer censorship or worse, including this country's, that is the United States, political prisoners. So free Mumia, free Leonard Peltier, free Joyanne Powell, free them all. So I will probably say a little bit about my own personal experience, but I do want to couch most of these comments in the context, more, I think, importantly, of the uh, field in which the context in which the field of Black or Africana studies finds itself. And then as a subset of that, what experiences obviously some academics face, or what challenges we face. And then if maybe, and maybe in the following discussion, a little more about the particulars of being at what is known as a historically Black college or university, HBCU, which adds, I think, another layer to as I noted here. Oliver made the point about being smothered. So the layer of smothering uh, uh, that is added by being at a historically Black college and university in Baltimore, Maryland, particularly, which has its own particular neo-colonial relationship and ensconced power. But as I said, overall, I'd like to just make a few points here. And I'll start by saying that obviously, given those gathered here and the purpose of this symposium, there is no isolated or singular targeting of those of us within Africana or Black studies. In terms of the use of propaganda, or having the field become a source itself of propaganda. This is an issue for all fields, disciplines, and even the idea of higher education in the context of Western empire. However, there are perhaps one or more particulars which may be relevant, even helpful, with some focus on Africana or Black studies. Similarly, an initial focus on the experience of African people anywhere, particularly here in the United States, will help reveal any number of contradictions and complications in any given society. However, there are perhaps, again, within those particulars, I'll just quickly summarize that the history of Black studies here in the United States, within one sentence, can be said to be a field that emerged initially as an unsanctioned intellectual wing of a Black liberation struggle, has since become part of the sanctioned effort by the state to suppress even remembering the Black liberation struggle. Perhaps in future discussion, or later on, I can tease out some of the sort of inside baseball, as I said, some of the uh, uh, esoteric elements of that. But for now, I think it's sufficient to say that what was once an unsanctioned intellectual wing of Black liberation has in many ways become part of a very sanctioned effort to suppress even the idea or even the memory of a Black liberation struggle. So quickly, while there are many names and iterations, I will be using interchangeably the names Africana and Black studies. Most importantly, they are meant to aid in the material struggle. Most importantly, these studies are meant to aid in the material struggle for change, at least initially, and to wage war with what Du Bois called the propaganda of history, whose purpose is to, in quite an opposing way, support the maintenance of colonization in its material and immaterial form. Now, because the Western Academy has always been part and parcel of a Western empire, an empire that creates colonies, not citizens, despite all claims to the opposite. And because Black studies originated in unsanctioned Black and internally colonized space, the resulting field has always been seen as an extension of an already existing Black insurgency. If you go back to the early newspaper reports of, I always think of this, the Nat Turner Rebellion, it is described, he and his fellow enslaved African rebels were described in the press of the day as insurgents in exactly the same way. Even when the United States is invading a foreign country, those looking to defend their homeland are referred to as insurgencies, requiring the state and sponsored counterinsurgency response. Therefore, as I'm arguing, and will continue to, the response to Black studies over the last 50 years plus since its inception has included an array of counterinsurgency characteristics. These would include the promotion and platforming of all kinds of overt and loud condemnations of the shamelessly ignorant who cannot or will not distinguish between an honest study of the Black experience and critical race theory, which has itself become a catchphrase meant to condemn people and ideas before they're being heard. And I think this sounds familiar. We've, as, as David Miller was saying earlier, I think there's a parallel between the use today in the United States of critical race theory as a condemnation of any black, particularly radical critique of what's happening here, with how the phrase anti-Semitism is used as a quick condemnation of any critique of Zionism. But there's also a highly sophisticated platforming and promotion of what can be by name called working Black studies, but without any particular focus of asking and answering some of the core questions which are supposed to be included in the field and which center in particular the condition of Black people and the various approaches to improving those conditions. Today, the sophisticated nature of the counterinsurgency is propaganda's ability to promote nearly any issue for discussion, from settler colonialism to enslavement, incarceration, or even police violence. Gone are the days where stories are entirely omitted. And in I think an updated attempt to evolve a response to Howard Zinn's accurate statement years ago that omission is worse than lying, because if you omit, you don't even leave the breadcrumbs through which people can find the truth through investigation. I think what is emerging here is a very sophisticated and nuanced response to that concern from those in power. That is, whereby omission would in ways be better than having what is going on today, an imposed rebranding and reframing of these issues and histories in such a way that is so supported and sanctionable by existing power and in its ability to not only talk about an issue, but frame it in a way that will discourage any radical critique and certainly any radical response. It's become, I think, a very interesting challenge and a very dangerous one. So gone are the days where stories will be omitted. Today, they are crafted for discussion so as to appear to contain real thought of the subject, but in the end, redirect audiences to the most safe frames, interpretations, analyses, and conclusions, all assuring the suppression of potential threatening movements. So I don't know if anybody watching has seen the documentary The 13th of some years ago, for instance, Ava DuVernay's Netflix presentation on the 13th Amendment and mass incarceration. That is, I think, almost a perfect example of what I'm describing, where the issue of mass incarceration and it being an extension of enslavement here in the United States can be rebranded and reframed so as whereas the most white and conservative voices from Newt Gingrich and the Koch brothers can be used as frames for analysis and solutions, and while erasing histories of revolutionary critique and response generated from the ground up and meant to be part of what is revealed to those who engage Black or Africana studies. For example, we can hear endlessly, for another example, we can hear endlessly of the remarkable life and career of Angela Davis, but more in recent years for her support of the Democratic Party politics than the struggle that propelled her to initial fame. She has been removed from the context of George and Jonathan Jackson and Rochelle McGee so that she can be safely promoted as a symbol of Black resistance without the same threat that the Jacksons and McGee represent. May McGee rest in peace. He just passed away recently after being let out of prison at the end of a life where he was the longest held political prisoner, maybe in the world. We get 1619 projects, which reduce Black struggle to conservative notions of American identity and reparations. We get brilliant scholarship that sets dangerously conservative limitations on what is allowable discussion of radicalisms, of the radical isms that terrify entrenched power. So it's the difficulty is that some of the scholarship and writing is even well done, well produced at least, well presented at least, but very carefully devoid of the radical innards which would truly promote the appropriate response were it included. Oh, and then today we get the massive overlay of Black capitalism as a solution to the conditions of Black people in this country, where despite popular representation, another massive propagandistic effort that works against not only my field, but of course the broader condition and struggle of Black people, that promotes particularly Black America as doing far better materially than is the case, with the promotion of celebrity and a handful of what would be considered a Black bourgeoisie as standing in for the broader community. I'm often reminded of Lorraine Hansberry's point about when she was asked herself, well, you're in the 60s, you're a famous artist, having a nice career, making good money. How could you be concerned about the condition of the rest of the Black community? And then, as she said, the tendency to forsake the abstract for the specific is in this case an error. We can't accept the abstract or the specific in replacement of the abstract. And that's in fact what is often encouraged through this overlay of Black capitalism as a solution to Black material inequality. This idea that through financial literacy, Black people can free themselves. Unlike some of my colleagues here, and I do need to stress this, unlike some of my colleagues presenting here this afternoon, evening, um, I have not suffered much of the overt claims of conspiracy. I have not had my name dragged through the presses. I have not been, well, targeted in the same way for removal from my institution. I have not been fired or forced out of the university entirely. However, I have, I think, experienced a form of the censorship that is maybe slightly the level above or slightly better than what has been described by some of my colleagues here. So I've been marginalized, forced out of my previous school, gaslit, lied upon, had my research plagiarized, and worse, repurposed for political goals antithetical to mine. I've been tagged quietly as a threat for daring to radicalize my students. I've been left underpaid, unacknowledged, overloaded with courses, and just relatively ignored, despite being one of the more senior and technically higher ranking faculty members on the campus, on the university, at the university. So I can only imagine the stress incurred by more overt forms of hostility and the loss of employment. I do, however, want to give some room for consideration to the frustration induced by soft power, quiet narrative control, or as it has been referenced earlier, perception management. That is the ability to ignore and marginalize those of us who would struggle for degrees of faculty governance, unionization, academic freedom, freedom of speech. All of that can be reframed and narrated differently so as to project a faculty member's either removal, choice to leave, or marginalization as something that is either self-imposed, chosen, or a construct of perhaps something of their own failure or doing, when in reality, it is all off the record, whispered, just quiet movement and removal from having any major impact on the university and a reach to the student body, reducing the reach to the student body, or reducing the impact. I shouldn't say reach, given the fact that we often get so many courses to teach. As it relates to just a few words on Black liberation, Black studies in Palestine, we've seen more recently a resurgence academically, or what is claiming to be scholarship around, for instance, Dr. King, and what would Dr. King have said were he alive today in response to uh, what was purported to have begun on October 7th, where Dr. King, who is clearly on record as saying that if this issue is to be resolved, Israel would have to give up the land it's occupying. He has somehow been repurposed into someone who would have been supportive of Zionism. Professor Boyd Barrett talked about film. Black studies is currently seeing the most intense wave of an assault via film, and few even recognize it. Disney and Netflix, with collusion lately of the Obamas, have literally taken ownership of image and narrative around Black history in ways making the work of actual scholars committed to the founding mission of Black studies to have to work overtime merely to maintain any connection to reality for their students. Next, Netflix said Malcolm X's just as a few examples, Netflix said Malcolm X's killer was a kind of lone nut working within the Nation of Islam outside the state apparatus. Brad Pitt's recent production company is now telling us Bob Marley was a liberal, unconcerned with Pan-Africanism and anti-colonial struggle or his connection with Black America, and leaves as his only named child in the film the most Zionist son, Ziggy. American Fiction, another recent film, fictionalizes the Black bourgeoisie, destroying class analysis. Selma, a film also made by Ava DuVernay, coming out of her background as a public relations representative working for Oprah Winfrey, erases literally the history of Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael from that film, which would be akin to having this symposium here and telling the history of it and erasing peers or any of the rest of us, while attempting to tell the accurate history of this OPS forum. Fred Hampton in the recent film is reduced to sidekick in a film claiming to be about him, and that reduces his assassination to a single Judas snitch, while reducing the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover's lunacy to be balanced by a more heroic agent just trying to do good. The state and its fears of what Fred Hampton represented are ignored. Even a recent film, the killer, what are the Flowers Moon film, whatever, that was purportedly about indigenous people here in the United States, takes an FBI agent lens to give credit to Hoover, again, as if literally an extension of the counterintelligence program, which itself called for these kinds of tactics to be used in suppressing all forms of radicalism here in the United States. Similarly, a media attack targeting Black audiences is so highly funded and managed. I'm sorry, a media attack targeting, that is, Black media targeting Black audiences, is so now well funded, from podcasts to news outlets to nominally entertaining film productions, all targeting Black audiences with highest levels of funding and management to attract, all designed ultimately to attract white, mainstream, affluent audiences corporate ad revenue and investment capital, assuring commercial-driven limitations to be imposed on what many consider to be news or economic analysis targeting the Black community. All of those communities come into my classrooms, by the way, uh, uh, and have to be confronted with traditions of radical Blackness or a Black radical tradition that has been removed from popular consciousness and mainstream education, all while seemingly being discussed, which is a tremendous contradiction. And academically, there has evolved a very sleek and sanctioned class of journals, not only just given time constraint, but honestly, this would just require a deep involvement with the field for some of this nuance to be seen, as is the case with any discipline, obviously. But so without that being possible, just I never like to say take my word for it. I always want to dare people not to take my word for it and investigate and do the research. But for now, suffice it to say that academically, there has evolved a very sleek and sanctioned class of journals, gatekeeping scholars, and well funded programs, all designed again to reduce Black studies to a praising investigation broadly of Blackness, as opposed to a project supportive of political and material revolutionary change. So, in conclusion, a number of points, just some things I'm involved in that I see as potential areas for at least progressive, if not fully revolutionary struggle. I just want to note that I've learned just the other day here in my home state of Maryland, in the East Coast of the United States, that it is legal to threaten violence against other people, but yet we are punished or silenced when attempting to call for peace in Palestine. So I've just had to note recently the contradictory space that again that we exist in. Uh, I think we are in a civilizational crisis of methodology that all of us as scholars or intellectuals or activists, journalists, et cetera, have to confront, where it is more difficult now to challenge the methods people use to reach conclusions when those conclusions can with the highest levels of psychological warfare sophistication be presented and provided for people with an ease we've never seen in world history. We get, particularly right now in the month of February here in the United States, we get a Black History Month that has been fully removed from Carter G. Woodson's original intent and is used as a psychological warfare mechanism against the Black August tradition, which is a more revolutionary recognition of the Black liberation struggle emanating, particularly in the 1970s, out of the struggles of George Jackson and those imprisoned within, or as has been said, re-imprisoned within the many sprawling prison systems and prisons and extended methods of surveillance and incarceration that exist in this country. There's this fight among some of us in academia for the right to unionize. We don't all currently have that right to at least have some attempt at collective bargaining to balance the almost exclusive monopoly of violence held by administrations in the state. That's an ongoing struggle. But we've seen, of course, recently everything from the suppression of the highest level, as it would be said, of academic administrators and presidents, to students at my own university for supporting Palestine, or being said to be supportive of Palestine, or be said to in some way be anti-Semitic, likely because of a critique of Zionism or the relationship between an institution or our institutions and the support of Israel's ongoing genocide, attempted genocide of Palestinians, ongoing successful genocidal operation against Palestinians. And we should be reminded that Theodore Herzl said himself in a letter to Cecil Rhodes, one of the greatest imperialists the world has ever known. That Zionism should be understood as a colonial project. So Cecil Rhodes and his project to colonize the planet, and remember, to reunify the white world that had been split through the so-called American Revolution. That was one of his greatest goals. And Herzl wanted to remind him that the project of Zionism was akin to that very European white supremacist colonizing imperialist project. And Black Studies finds itself again caught up in its initial struggle of resisting those efforts, beginning with the particular wing of the African diaspora here in the United States. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to continue the discussion. Again, thanks to those who convened this and for the invitation. It's been great.
Thanks very much, Jared. That's fantastic talk. And really, I think, compared to the kind of sledgehammer examples of, say, David and myself in terms of, getting hit when you step on a landmine kind of thing, I think you really effectively highlight sort of quite how subtle in a way and ideological these kind of constraints are. And, it just reminds you how easy it is for so many of our colleagues just to be absolutely oblivious. And, I think we've all had this early on in our careers where you're moving through, you're jumping through the hoops and so on, and you think you're being really critical and so on, but in a multitude of different ways, you're being directed down a very particular path and so on. And, it seems there's not many of us who wake up and realize that. I mean, in a way, your journey has been, you picked up on it in a sense quicker than, say, someone like such as myself who had to be sort of hit very hard to suddenly realize how bad the system was and so on and so on. And that was my fault for stepping all over an ongoing propaganda operation in a war kind of thing.